at an organization. We weren't quite sure if they were a fit or not, so we're kind of sitting on it. But they do all their leadership meetings, he said, in VR.
Yeah.
And so you can credit them with me going out and buying some VR, a set of VR, and I tried to connect with another TA leader where you do the whiteboard in 3D space.
Yeah.
Matt, not productive. It was not productive for us.
And I'm not necessarily disagreeing with that. I think that so I'm a VR nerd. Let's go ahead and wind back. So
I'm an aspiring nerd. I'm right behind you. I'm trying to learn VR.
Well, so in 2012, I actually helped with the Kickstarter that became Oculus. And so then I got the test unit in 2014. And then Facebook, I want to say it was 2015, ended up buying Oculus for what, it was $1 billion at the time. And like, I know that the traditional press and everything was saying like, okay, why did they overpay so much for Oculus? And the minute you try it on, in my mind, and this was back when it wasn't very good, it was like a roller coaster simulator was the most impressive thing. I got it immediately. And I think that the potential for where it's going is far in advance, but there's so many companies starting to just kind of lay the foundation now. I do think that once the hardware becomes more mainstream and there becomes a little bit more familiarity with how to manipulate around there, because there is a little bit of learning curve, particularly on the new Oculus, because you got two handsets and they do different things. I think that it is an ideal use case for a lot of HR situations. I'm going to go ahead and say training may not end up being one of them, but when it comes to situational assessments and when it comes to like interviews, I think that there's a lot of promise in at least the betas I've seen.
I would agree. I think there's a tremendous amount of potential, but I also think it's got to become less cumbersome. It's just, you're putting a tank on your head for the most part with this thing, and it's heavy, and but from what I have seen, if you're a super nerd on this, you'll get it. I've started to see some stuff come up where you are in your real environment, and it's augmenting that. So like you can drill a hole into your living room floor and jump into that, and then you're in a whole other world, and then eventually you climb back out, and you've never left this 10-foot space in your living room, but it's just your mind just goes crazy.
Yeah, no, and that's the AR is sort of, I would say, the stepping point between the two, but Apple's coming out with their new AR headset. I believe they said September, and I think that's going to push adoption up. Oculus already has that capability, obviously, but it's interesting because do you remember Layer? Back, like honestly, the technology is the exact same. And so my question is, because it's so cool, how come it hasn't gotten adoption yet? And that's the thing I can't really understand, other than maybe
it's a pain in the ass to use. That's why.
It is a pain in the ass to use, but it's also really fun. Is what I'll say. You can sit courtside for NBA games because they stream those, so it's like being in Jack Nicholson seats for the Lakers.
Well, that we talk about, huge. I could see that, sport, but I could see it for training. But I think it's got a little ways to go.
Yeah, it does a little ways to go.
Are you ready to jump in?
Let's do it.
All right, here we go.
Welcome to the CXR channel, our premier podcast for talent acquisition and talent management. Listen in as the CXR community discusses a wide range of topics focused on attracting, engaging, and retaining the best talent. We're glad you're here.
Every time I say we're going to get rid of that music, and then I find myself bopping to it. Look, welcome to another edition of CXR Community Podcast, where we bring industry leaders and friends together to kind of talk about what's going on in the talent and recruiting space, and where we sometimes just sit down for a few to connect and catch up with you, the watcher, listener, and the peanut gallery. So if you happen to dial in live today, we are streaming on LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, or the website at cxr.org/podcast. And if you do see a chat window, please use it to say hello. Drop in your profile link, ask us a question, or just drop in a comment. That does go a long way sort of towards the conversation, and frankly, let us know this thing's even working. Today, I am pleased to introduce to you a friend and industry dude that goes way back. Probably one of the most talented writers and just insightful guys, clearly in our space, and he's fun to talk with. I want to tell everybody, just give a little hello, welcome to Matt Charney. Matt, how are you?
I am doing awesome. Thank you for having me. Thank you for having me.
I'm glad to have you here. We also we're gonna do double trouble. Who just popped into the green room is Mr.
Oh,
Crispin.
no.
Let's
Oh,
get Mr.
no.
Crispin in here. Hello, Jerry.
Hello,
Jerry, good to see you.
Matt. It's great to see you anytime.
I wish it was more frequently, but it's good to have you dialing in. Now I feel like I'm on. Chris and I were just talking, but to the Godfather of Soul over here.
I was listening in the backstage. It took me a while to get here. Apparently, I didn't know my password.
Happens to the best of us. Happens to the best of us. Matt, for those who maybe don't know you, why don't you give us kind of an escalator pitch of sort of who is Matt Charney?
Matt Charney is somebody who refers to them as elevator pitches, which is what I assume you wanted. My name is Matt Charney, and I am the talent acquisition community leader at HRCom, which is a big title that basically means that I oversee all talent acquisition related events, content, and community, and anything auxiliary touching that for HR.com. People aren't familiar with that, probably are. It's even older than I am, and it is about 2 million members, the largest clearing site for certification for HR professionals in the world. And so prior to that, I've been essentially in the same role, but with different people paying for my paycheck for, well over a decade now. Essentially, just covering the talent acquisition space and working in marketing leadership roles and publishing about the exact same topics we continue to talk about. So, 10 years in now.
I would say so, Matt. I think we met in probably 2009.
I can tell you exactly when we met. It was in Boston at Recruit Fest.
Yeah, so 2010. I was so close. So 2010, you were still at Monster. You were the social media engagement manager.
You're either looking at my LinkedIn profile, or I'm impressed, but yes, that's correct.
Yeah. Okay. So you have been a director of marketing. You have been a chief content officer. You have been a strategy leader, an executive editor. But look, I know you started to get into it, Matt. But what the hell is a TA practice leader at HR.com?
Right. So HR.com's like interesting in the fact that it, SHRM's kind of coming around. I don't want to disparage, but essentially HR and recruiting, I think we can agree, are very different audiences, both in interest and I would say persona, to call on my marketing titles. And essentially what is, entity that's mostly about professional training, development, and making sure that people are equipped to have the skills to succeed. The owner, Deb McGrath, who is watching this right now, I'm sure. So hi, Deb. She has eyes.
There's 7 watchers, so we can say hi to Deb and the 6 others.
Six watchers. Those are the committed people, right? Anyway, Deb decided that she wanted to increase the amount of talent acquisition content, as well as people in the space. Obviously, there's a big demand from the vendor side to kind of pick up the TA stuff. And so, I came in. So my kind of recurrent responsibilities are, and I didn't even know this before I joined, and I've been an HR.com member for 10 years. We put out a magazine called TA Excellence every single month. And so I'm responsible for editing and helping to compile that. We do state of the industry reports, and I generally have 4 of those hanging out at any one point in time. So right now I'm finishing one on high volume and hourly recruiting. And those are informed by advisory boards, which I run. So in that particular case, we have kind of half vendors. So, like the COO of Fountain and the CEO of Paradox. On the other side, we have the person who runs talent acquisition for Whole Foods, one who runs it for Walmart. So sort of like you, except vendors are invited for the dialogue. We put together a survey, complete it, send it out, and then we turn it into a white paper, infographic, and a virtual event. We also are starting to launch live events. So we have our next one coming up in Nashville in October.
Oh, I love that. So let's come back to that, because I want to talk about the events. You've got a podcast, I think, or a webinar coming up with Danny soon. I want to make sure we mention that, because I think that's going to definitely be worth jumping on for folks. But like you're doing, Matt, it sounds like, and consuming lots of research in our space. You're networking with SMEs. You're building, I think you said you're building advisory boards. You are facilitating. You're talking shop. So if we were going to ask you in today's snackable 20-minute segment or so, what do you think TA leaders, specifically talent acquisition leaders, what do you think they should sort of be paying attention to right now?
The economy.
So, little broader.
Well, they generally tend not to. It's as a lagging indicator, to be honest with you, which is why you have hiring freezes and other things, because of lack of forward planning. But look, I think that we're still in a place in talent acquisition where we're starting to, or we continue to be overly occupied with making it complex and adding complexity. So, technology, headcount and specialization and all that sort of thing. And we really aren't focusing a tremendous amount on recruiter training and capability. And so that, to me, is what I think that the leading departments, interestingly enough, have focused on, and didn't necessarily have the amount of turnover that you saw writ large within the sector, the companies that really have invested in training and recruiter enablement. But what's going to inevitably happen is another hiring slowdown. You're going to have a huge wave of professionals drop off, then we have to rehire them, then we have to train again, as opposed to building up capabilities within the function, things like talent planning, career development coaching, even being able to do some of the outplacement activities that will generally go third party. So I think that we're at a really good inflection point as we have all these people who've entered the profession. As you know, recruiting was one of the, I believe it was, after you take your healthcare and big data sort of jobs, was top in terms of career growth over a Q1. I think you have a real chance to take away the platform stuff, take away the highly abstract theoretical conversations we like to have, and really focus on the basics and build capability within the function of people who are looking at this not as a stepping stone or some existential crisis like I did, but actually as a career. And I think that training and building up those internal capabilities are really important, because even if my company's not hiring or retracting, I think that the skills of good talent acquisition professionals can continue to build up both retention as well as business performance. So
it's interesting that you say that, because it seems to me that what Jerry and I have seen, and I won't speak for you, Jerry, obviously chime in, but what I think we've seen in the last, especially 6 months, and it's not that we didn't say it 2.5 years ago, but especially in the last 6 months, we've heard a lot of leaders saying, I have to get back to the basics.
Yeah,
I got to go back to blocking and tackling. I got to build those blocks, those skills, those basic recruiting skills back. And I've got to stop chasing, which is really funny, because on the front end of the show, we're talking about a shiny bauble, right, with this VR piece, but I got to sit down and start doing recruiting again.
Yeah, 100%. And I have done a lot of employer training and getting a lot of requests in. And it used to be for things like consulting about which RPA, so chatbot or AI solution they should buy. Now it's as simple as, can you tell my recruiters how to stop getting ghosted? And
that's not even 101. That's requirements you got to do before you can get into the class.
Right, but when you turn over your entire recruiting department and then outline economic event, I feel like that's going to be an inevitability. And so I really hope that rather than continuing to cycle along with the economy, that we become a little bit more static, and people stick around so that we can get a little bit more accelerated than how do I negotiate an offer.
Do you really think, though, that if in the next month or year, if we do have a slowdown, you use the term slowdown.
Yeah.
And I think the spigot goes on and off. I don't think it really slows down.
No, I think you're right. I think that the worker types change. And I think that the hot industries change. So what's obviously triggering everyone talking, oh my gosh, we're slowing down, is tech, which is not a huge part of the GDP if you look at it in terms of both percentage and jobs. So yeah, I think there always will be demand, but to that point, with the outlier of high volume hourly positions, which is a whole other widgetized world because it's more of a supply chain function than a TA function, honestly. But with that exception, I think that the skills fundamentally need to be a recruiter or cross transferable. And so that's why I think, I've always loved working for RPOs because they kind of have hedged against that. If one client slows down, you can kind of move on to another. And so I think that as that total talent picture continues to solidify, because whereas that was very marketing, like here's the future, it has come to pass where, where you work and your employment type doesn't really so much matter as it used to. And so I think that being able to combine, let's say, the agency recruiting skill of being able to land project workers quickly, combining that with like the in-house functionality. If you just kind of look at both the MSP and in-house world, they're coming together really quickly. And so, yes, I do always think that there'll be a demand. And I think that will be offset on the tech side probably by the platform plays, which continue to grow. Cool.
Interesting. Well, look, Matt, you're on the road. Jerry just got back from Unleash. I did not. I'm in the middle of migrate. Like as you can probably see, my office is a mess. So I'm still in the middle of being a homeowner and a mover again. So I'm not on the road yet. So I've got FOMO between the two of you. I'm literally between the two of you. You're both on the road. What am I missing out there? If I haven't hit the road yet and jumped back into the event scene yet, what's going on out there? What do I have FOMO about?
Well, I mean, Jerry was at Unleash last week, so he could probably answer that there because I think that's been a really big event comparative to what we've seen. But for me, even the most pedestrian of events, which is to say, like, I went to PSYOP, something that I would never have gone to in the past. Yeah, right, Jerry? Which, by the way, very, very interesting because they're talking about the exact same issues, but at a completely different level.
Sure, they're all PhDs, so they're going to talk at a very unusual articulation of that.
It's the only time I've ever sat there and known the subject and it just being over my head. What I thought was particularly interesting is they presented scientific papers, and most of them were people getting in front of an audience, a huge audience, going through their methodology, admitting it didn't work, and then sitting back down. I'm like, that is the antithesis of what we consider thought leadership, right? But even at an event like that, I think that the material probably pretty consistent. If I went to the Mega Trend session, would have been identical to what you would have seen at probably an Unleash or SHRM or Name Your Show.
Just with more charts.
Just with more, just with more charts and more scenario mapping, which in 52-page handouts in a lot of cases, I have one I've been writing on the margins of ever since. But one of the things that I just think you do see is this overlap of specializations, because almost all the content for this IO conference was TA. And I start seeing TA conferences starting to have a lot more generalist talent management stuff when you look at mobility, diversity, certainly. And so I do see this interesting bleeding through. But I think most importantly is I don't learn anything. And again, apologies, this being the medium. I don't learn all that much when I'm not able to interact, ask follow-up questions, have those collisions, in the hallways or outside or at Jerry's infamous dinners. So for me, it's less about content, it's less about I'm staying on the cutting edge. And it's just now at this point more about getting some of that face-to-face time and having informal conversations, which is something I desperately miss because no TA leader is ever going to tell me what's actually happening in a setting like this. You know what I mean?
The nuance that, whether it be a dinner or just a side conversation, the nuance of what you're hearing, I think is really where the true learning is. And if I go to a session, what I end up learning is from the audience. I can watch the audience and see how they're responding to the content that's being curated by the person on stage. And that tells me a huge amount of whether or not there's a whole new group of people who have to be taught this thing over and over and over again, or whether there's some ability to absorb more complex ways of looking at things.
And then we have the push, which is how many people stand up with an iPad and take a picture of the slide, right? That could really go either direction.
Oh my God, I forgot about those people.
I was just saying the other thing that I miss obviously is hashtag trolling, but
Back channel chatter.
Yep.
Yeah, back row of the conference. What I do miss is kind of about if you've been doing it long enough, I think, and you're at a conference or a session, I think in the first 7 minutes, maybe you can decide if you're going to hang out for the rest of the session. And when you do make it to the end of the session, it's interesting to see if it resonated by how many people get up and go up to talk to the speaker. Like, is there a quick line to say, you just shook my world, or how do I get more of this, or, that kind of thing. And I do miss that. I don't know if barometer is the right word, but I do sort of miss that gauge of engagement.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think also the gauge of engagement being how many people actually take advantage of the follow up with us kind of slides. Certainly as a speaker, that's my gauge as to whether material hits or not, is do people take advantage of the 5-minute Q&A in which my contact information is splashed across the page,
Yeah, it's different virtually. It's different.
It sure is.
Okay, so we're coming up on time, but I want to ask you, you've got an upcoming chat, I think, with Danny Monahan. Now, for those who don't know, she is the VP of TA at Google Cloud now. She's former Uber.
We actually already had that, by the way. So
did you? I thought it was coming up.
No, that recording's done, and then I just had one with the head of talent acquisition, Indeed. We'll be having a bunch more coming up in various events, but right now, I believe Danny will be one of our keynote speakers at the Inspire event in Nashville, which is our next in-person. But yeah, what I would say is if you want certification credits, but more importantly, want good TA content, we do at least 4 webinars a week for virtual events. We also have a huge training library. And between that, I also get to do a lot of recordings and interviews with TA leaders. So much like you, but on much more the content, less facilitated conversation side, I'm having those conversations all the time. And yes, Danny just started at Google, and as it turns out, they have pretty tight brand protections. So if we mention this against those, I apologize.
Here, I'm gonna throw a little HR.com link. I don't know that the label needs a link, but the HR.com link, I put it in the chat. We've got some folks in there. So sorry I missed it. I thought it was actually upcoming because she was going to talk about the tech. Is there a way, if I go out to HR.com, is there a way that I can actually watch the recorded webinar, Matt?
There is. And so if you go to the virtual event section, you'll be able to find an archive for all of our recordings. And, there's a lot of good stuff on there that even I have missed coming into the company. So I'd say my first 2 months were spent looking at archived recordings just because I didn't know they were there.
Few people would know that Matt's key connection to Danielle is from Cuba.
Actually, Jerry, you want to hear a much more interesting story about my connection with Danielle?
Well, yes, we do.
Okay. So when I was a recruiter and one of the few people who was doing what we now call social recruiting and employer branding, at the time was me being lazy and knowing how to use Google. Michael Monahan, her son, contacted me and said, and random kid, but I happen to call him back and goes, can you tell me how SEO for jobs works? And I said, I don't know, but here's what I think. And as a result, he built a company, like a startup, that was among the first to do that. And through that, I actually met Danielle. So that was round number 2.
I love it.
Fantastic. Well, okay. So Matt, let me ask you, we got a new question we've been asking folks before we wrap up the podcast.
Sure.
If you published a book today about what you're seeing in our space today, what would the title of that book be?
Oh, man, I'm a copywriter, so this is going to be a hard thing to improv because I want to screw with the words. I think it would be called How Hiring Works, because I think that there's this weird disconnect. I read a lot of consumer media around the job and career space, obviously, and the disconnect between what people who aren't on the inside perceive as what goes on behind Oz's curtain and what we know happens is so huge. And I don't know why there's so much mystery around it. But at the same time, I really do think that fundamentally, the average person does not have an understanding of how the fundamentals of getting a job work in today's economy.
How hiring really works.
How hiring really works.
How really
would kind of be. I'd like to write a chapter of that.
Deal.
I'll do the forward. Can I do the forward?
Capelli's already offered to, but you can get the afterward.
Okay, so then the big question becomes, Matt, who gets the first signed copy and what do you write in it?
Honestly, I think Eric Weingart would have to get the first signed copy.
Really?
I can't think of anyone who has been as transformative of my understanding of that topic or my career, even though obviously we're not as close in touch. I still consider him to probably be my primary mentor in terms of understanding the space and how to treat both recruiters and candidates.
How cool is that? That's
That is
really
super
interesting.
cool. Yeah, very nice. Yeah, we should probably get him on the show. He's still in the space. He's still around.
He still does stuff.
Still around. There's no crazy conferences.
He's alive. That's all that counts.
Well, I got to tell you, Matt, you got people telling you to write the book. It's coming in the chat. Praise.
All right. Well, I tell you what, as soon as I get through this white paper that was due on Friday, we'll start it on that. But it is something that I've already gotten a publisher to agree to do and written the outline and everything. So it's just a matter of time.
Oh, I love that. That's fantastic. Well, Matt, I want to thank you so much for giving us some time and joining us. Jerry and I always love to catch up with you. So I'm glad you were actually able to make it today.
Yeah, no, thank you for having me. And it was a good kickstart to the week.
Yeah, good stuff. Well, hang out in the green room for a minute. Jerry and I are going to circle back to you. I just want to share with everybody else what's next. All right. So later this week, Jerry and I have invited Tara Doyle. She's the head of talent at Roche to join us for a special broadcast. It's called a CXR Uncorked. Now, that is, if you haven't listened to those before, this one you're going to be able to watch. It's where we sit down, each of us with a bottle of wine remotely, and just talk. It's sort of like Drunk History, but for recruiting. So don't miss that. That's this Friday afternoon. It's around drive time. If you're still driving, I don't know. But you can also grab it later, the recording out there at cxr.org/podcast. Now, next week also, we're bringing in one of our favorites, Madeline Loreno. She is the founder and CEO of Aptitude Research. She is going to talk with us about TA tech trends within the world of recruiting. And on June 9th, I am happy to welcome, we mentioned it before, he's coming up, Ravi Tandra. He is the CEO and founder of Proven Base, and he's going to conduct what we call a Solutions Spotlight demo. That is an open conversation with some of our members. And lastly, June 15th, we're actually conducting our Q2 EMEA community meeting, and that is a great opportunity for members to strengthen their networks and discuss regional challenges and key resources within those markets. All of this and more, obviously, at cxr.works/events. And if you haven't figured it out yet, we don't get paid to do these. We don't have any sponsors or ads. Nobody gets paid to sort of be part of the show. But what does help us along is that if you haven't already, please be sure to hit that subscribe and share button on your favorite streaming service. We're on nearly all of them, as well as regularly here on LinkedIn, Twitter, YouTube, and Facebook. And that just lets us know you're enjoying the content and that we should keep plugging along, and plug along we do. So until next week, have a wonderful week, everybody. And we will absolutely 100% see you next time. Take care.
Thanks for listening to the CXR channel. Please subscribe to CXR on your favorite podcast resource and leave us a review while you're at it. Learn more about CXR at our website, cxr.works, facebook.com and twitter.com/careercrossroads, and on Instagram at careerxroads. We'll catch you next time.